This afternoon, I want to talk about the power of balance. I want to talk about the power of balance as a dynamic for transforming gender relationships. I first came across this when I was working in Ghana with a group of young people on gender equality. We were running a drama workshop, and after a while, one of the young people said to me, "Patrick, you know, this is all very well in theory, but it won't work in practice. It might work in the UK, but it won't work here." And I had two thoughts. One was that I could understand that this felt very much like a message that was being pushed from outside. And the second was that it also was very clear that it's not really working in the UK. So I realized that we needed a different approach. And a few days later, with the same group, I was running a workshop based on trust. And one of the exercises involved the young people leaning in towards each other, leaning away from each other, trying to achieve balance. And I noticed that whenever the young people achieved balance, everyone was smiling. So I asked the group what it was. Why was everyone smiling, I asked. It was fun, they said. We felt on a level, we felt equal with each other. It was good achieving it. I felt safe, said another. As an experiment, I asked them to play with one person being higher than the other, being out of balance. And they struggled with that. It's hard work, they said. I don't feel safe, said another. We're not on a level, another said. Today, I want to address the issue of balance in those two areas, of gender and of the physical experience of balance. We use the phrase gender balance a lot. We use it to talk about equality of opportunity and power in gender relationships. And this young woman, in many ways, is the epitome of it. And yet, it exists primarily as a concept, and is often viewed with suspicion, as something politically correct, or as a threat to the status quo. Today, I want to talk about it as a physical experience, and share with you my own light bulb moment. That if we can physicalize gender balance, if we can make it a physical experience rather than a concept, we can bypass the suspicion and fears and make it a reality that people can experience and enjoy. We start with the balancing of voice. Everyone is invited to share their experience by telling others about some critical situations in their lives. All voices are given an equal chance, an equal opportunity to tell their story, so they're balanced. As the group discovers that it shares many experiences, it also develops its shared collective voice. The individual voice starts to become a group voice. Participants start to talk about we rather than I. And there is the invitation to look at how we are behaving right now in this space. What is our balance of power? How are we using space? Who is using what space? And as we stress equal participation in the process, we start to become aware of the extent to which our group is balanced in how different individuals use their voice and how much or how little others are using theirs. And it's the same with how we use our bodies, how we use space. Who's in the circle and who's pulling away from the circle. And we start to become aware of how these physical patterns reflect our gendered roles, often in unbalanced ways, with gender expectations playing out in many subtle and not so subtle ways. Before one workshop, I remember, where the focus was on gender equality, and the space was pretty dirty and needed a fair amount of cleaning before we started, it was the women who were the ones sweeping the floor, putting the chairs out, and who got the space ready. Gender roles are being performed all the time. We play games to challenge these gender norms and balance our use of voice, movement, and space. We use the circle as the default shape for optimum equality of participation. And as the group understands how balance works, they want to work towards it. The shared process of empowerment, where each member of the group has an equal voice and is given equal respect, is the living embodiment of balance, and the group recognizes it and its power as a platform for change. They share their experiences of their relationships and how they feel they are expected to behave as young women and young men. They use each other's bodies to sculpt them into the form they feel represents these expectations. The men's bodies are often open, relaxed, facing forwards. The women's bodies are often folded in, legs closer, heads down, and hands clasped. Their gaze is often downwards or to the side. The group is then asked what they think could be done differently to make this more balanced and to make physical changes to the bodies of these two people, to make these bodies more physically balanced. They might raise one body or change the angle of the head or change the hands. They are sculpting balance, and they're learning through the body, not through the brain. In this way, it becomes apparent that gender is a series of actions, as Judith Butler says in Gender Trouble. The action of gender requires a performance that is repeated. The group is discovering that these actions don't have to be repeated or rehearsed in the same way. They're developing the physical skills to experiment with changing this performance of gender and can see that this story and the story of their lives could change as a result. Practicing these new behaviors in the safe environment of a group that has balance embedded into its own way of being together provides a rehearsal for reality, a safe space where changing gender relationships can be played with to create balance as practice for real life. Asked who has the power when they're happy that the couple is balanced spatially and physically, and the group hesitate. Who has the power in balance? Gradually it emerges that the group feel that neither the woman nor the man has the power now. The power is now shared. It's existing somewhere between them, not within one of them. There is a sense of anticipation, of breath being held, as if we're opening up a version of power that could be radical in its implications, both for the young women and for the young men. This is not power of one person over another. This is power shared between people. And here I want to share a quote from John Archer in Male Violence. For many males, even consenting sexual relationships are expressions of dominance and are a fulfillment of their masculine role. With balance, we are offering a greater choice of roles for young men to play in sexual relationships, in peer relationships, and as future fathers. To achieve balance requires strength, discipline, courage, focus, and persistence, but it's from both people involved in the relationship. And of course, we know balance is good in an almost absolute way. We talk of work-life balance, a balanced diet. Part of the power of balance is that it gives us pleasure. And as a guide to gender and sexual relationships, it's a helpful way of calibrating the degree to which any relationship is healthy. A much safer way than focusing on my pleasure or your pleasure. This pleasure of balance is something that is a powerful alternative to the experience of loss of power in changing gender relationships that is often feared, especially by men. In fact, men are often relieved about this change of dynamic. A cultural expression of balance that is also universal is justice. When we see justice represented in sculpture or art, we see the use of scales in balance. But more of that in a moment. Let's return to our group. We use the swapping of roles, of gender roles, as part of this experience of balance and imbalance between men and women. Women play men, and men play women, using improvisation to experience the world by taking on the role of a different gender. A profound disruption occurs of our normal perception when we take on the role of the other, and our experience of power or disempowerment becomes more acute. We find out what it's like to have a very different experience, a physical experience of power, and often our understanding of balance or imbalance is changed profoundly. This physical experience of playing a different role makes the familiar and accepted norms and roles unfamiliar. The normal becomes defamiliarized. This physical realization can be the catalyst for changing our behavior. As Cordelia Fine says in Delusions of Gender, the experience of imagining oneself as another transforms both self-perception and, through that transformation, behavior. Performances that are made by the group and which tell their story in their words to their community open up the possibility of making this process of balancing power a more public one. In interactive performance, the audience is invited to identify the person who they feel needs help, who is disempowered, and to take on that character's role in the story. They're invited to touch tag, to come into the space and touch the person on the shoulder who they feel needs help, and try out different actions and strategies for bringing about positive changes and more balanced power relationships. Here we see an older woman coming into the performance to take on the role of a young girl who's been in an abusive relationship. She's taking on the role of this girl, and she's going to try out different approaches to the challenges that the girl has been experiencing. This public performance and re-performance of gender roles demonstrates that they are not inevitable. By physically changing the actions of the characters in the performance, the audience become spectators, in Augusto Boal's terms, in the process of reforming gender into more balanced dynamics. A public space is opened up, a public space of changing roles and power levels built into it. A possibly conflictual area is encountered as a playful act, where the fun of changing roles and playing with different actions to achieve a more balanced power relationship becomes an invitation to see gender roles as not fixed, but open for change, and that change can come from within the community. This is the power of balance. If the audience is a group of power holders, there is the opportunity for them to be engaged in bringing about balance in a more structural sense. Interactive theatre for justice invites those power holders to experience gender imbalance when they take on the role of someone who is disempowered, to explore ways in which that power imbalance can be changed through space, voice, and movement. And to experience physically what it's like for that person to try to access justice, which brings us back to our scales and representation of justice being a pursuit of balance. This group of women are marching through town to Parliament, holding banners and placards saying, "Police, When you arrest us, don't rape us. These are all women in sex work who've been together for some time, sharing their stories, their struggles, and who've performed their story in their communities and in their local police stations. They've now decided that they want to tell their story to their MPs, to engage them in a direct experience of living life in their shoes, and to change the way the police behave towards them. They experience systematic sexual violence from the police, and they want their members of parliament to know about this and, critically, to experience this total imbalance of power physically. The performance takes place in Parliament, with the MPs taking on the role of the protagonist, a woman in sex work, facing the choice of handing over her earnings or being raped. And they experience the fear, the powerlessness that goes with this, firsthand. They try, with the support of the rest of the audience, to find ways in which balance can be achieved, with some going to the victim support unit, some going to the local chief to report that abuse. The MPs, having experienced life as someone without power and having tried different strategies for redressing power imbalance, are invited to respond publicly, right there, to what they can do to ensure that justice is done, that power is balanced on an organizational or a community level. For the first time, the possibility that the law around sex work needs to be changed is openly discussed. The rebalancing of power on a structural level is as important as that between individuals. By opening up a policy-making process to a physical experience, a process that enables people in positions of power to physically experience what it's like to have no power, there is the opportunity of creating policies that support the balance of power in schools, hospitals, and homes. These physical approaches to gender balance are now being used in schools and colleges all over Malawi. We train 3,000 teachers a year how to use these techniques for making gender equality a reality, both in their own lives and in the lives of the children they teach. We've just completed a project with 9,000 girls, enabling them to get the confidence and the support they need to have balanced and equal access to education and health. Communities like this in Malawi, Ghana, DRC, and Bangladesh are using these performative approaches to promote more balanced relationship between women and men, girls and boys. This is the power of balance. Equality becomes more part of lives, not as a concept or an agenda, but as a lived experience. It becomes more part of our lives at work, at home, in our communities, so that individuals and groups, like the one we saw at the beginning, have the communities around them to support the changes that they want to make in their lives. Thank you.